The rooftop ballroom glittered with chandeliers and glass walls opening onto the Denver skyline. Snow still capped the Rockies in the distance, a reminder of how close wilderness stood to the city. Inside, every detail had been staged to celebrate Gareth's 35th birthday string quartet. Trays of hors d'oeuvres, a private chef carving prime rib under golden light. I had contributed more than $1,000 to make it happen vintage wine from a Napa vineyard, and part of the chef's fee. No one said a word of thanks. My parents floated past me as if I were a guest in someone else's family. Their attention stayed locked on Gareth, who stood in the center of the room shaking hands and soaking in compliments like they were oxygen. Such charm, such ease. My mother gushed to Aunt Lillian. He's always had a gift with people. The fact that my brother hadn't held a job in years didn't seem to matter. I kept near the bar, my glass of wine balanced in hand, when I caught whispers at the next table. Celine works herself to death, one cousin muttered. All that tech nonsense. But what's it for? She's still alone. Another voice laughed softly. Career over family, she'll regret it. I stared into my glass, willing myself not to react. It wasn't new. The message had been clear since childhood. Gareth the star, Celine the shadow. Tonight, the contrast was sharper than ever. I breathed deep, ready to endure another evening of being invisible, not yet knowing that the moment waiting ahead would demand far more than quiet tolerance. The room shifted when my father stepped onto the small stage near the quartet. He raised his glass, then tapped the microphone, his voice carrying with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Tonight we honor Gareth, my brilliant son, on his 35th birthday. And we have an announcement to make. The quartet stopped mid-note. Conversations faded into silence. I set down my glass, sensing something off. Though I couldn't name it yet, my father smiled wide, his arm draped around Gareth. Our generous daughter, Celine, has decided to gift her penthouse near Union Station to her brother. A fresh start for him, a symbol of family unity. The words hit like a blow. My breath stalled. My home, the place I had fought for through years of late nights, contracts, and risk had just been handed away like it was nothing more than a party favor. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling. Some guests clapped automatically. Others murmured approval as if the decision were already carved in stone. I stood frozen, a heat rising up my chest, humiliation pressing against my ribs. Gareth's fiancée leaned into him, eyes glimmering with triumph. I looked to my mother. She nodded at me as though coaxing a child to behave, her lips curving into a smile that was more command than comfort. "It's only fair," she whispered to the nearest guest, loud enough for me to hear. The noise grew suffocating. I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for my compliance, expecting my smile, my gracious nod. My hand trembled against the stem of my glass, but my voice came steady when I spoke. No, the word cut through the air, sharper than any note the quartet could have played. The applause faltered. Conversations stuttered into silence. My father's smile dropped, replaced with a look I knew too well, disbelief sharpening into rage. I straightened, meeting his gaze. I worked for that home. It's mine. I won't give it away. The ballroom seemed to tilt, and I knew in that instant the night was no longer about Gareth's birthday. It was about me, and the line I had just drawn. For a moment, the silence held. Then Gareth's chair scraped back hard against the floor. He stormed toward me, his face flushed, the charm he wore like a mask stripped away. "You ungrateful!" His words broke off as his hand swung. The crack echoed through the ballroom, sharp and final. Pain seared across my cheek, forcing my head to the side. I staggered but did not fall. Gasps erupted. Someone shouted my name. A dozen phones lifted at once. red recording dots glowing. My pearl earring spun across the marble floor, skittering until it stopped beneath a table leg. The room seemed to shrink, every detail etched in impossible clarity, the chandelier's reflection in the glass. The murmur of guests already whispering, the red blotch I felt blooming on my skin. I touched my cheek lightly, steadying my breath. Gareth stood over me, chest heaving, waiting for me to break, but I would not give him that. Slowly, I bent down, picked up the earring, and closed my fingers around its smooth surface. I looked at him, my brother, the golden child whose failures were forever excused, and offered the faintest smile. Happy birthday, brother. The words landed heavier than any shout could have. His eyes flickered, confusion breaking through the fury. I turned before he could respond. The crowd parted as I walked, whispers chasing me like shadows. Phones followed my steps, capturing every angle of my exit. Behind me, the party had collapsed into chaos, but I no longer belonged to it. The heavy doors closed as I stepped into the hallway, the air cooler, quieter, but no less charged. My hand tightened around the earring, and I knew I needed to call someone who would understand. The hallway was hushed, the sound of music and chatter muffled behind the heavy doors. My cheek still burned where Gareth's hand had landed, but the sharper pain was deeper, the realization that no one in that room had stepped between us. Not my mother, not my father, not even a guest who dared to question what had just happened. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. My thumb hovered over Maris's name. She answered on the first ring. Celine. What's wrong? The words spilled out before I could stop them. The announcement, the slap, the silence afterward. Her anger cracked through the line. They humiliated you in front of everyone, and he hit you, Celine. This can't stand. Call Eleanor. The name stilled me. Eleanor Whitcomb, my grandmother, 80 years old, still sharp as steel. The woman who had outlived 2 recessions, a failed real estate market, and half the city's scandals. She had always been distant but never blind. The Harwood reputation still moved at her command. Maris, she'll think I'm dragging her into drama. I whispered. Drama. He struck you. That's assault, and your parents sat there like statues. Eleanor's the only one they still fear. Call her. I stared at the glowing contacts list, my pulse racing. For years I had avoided leaning on her, convinced I had to prove I could stand on my own. But tonight, independence had left me alone in a hallway, holding an earring like it was a shield. My thumb slid to her name, Eleanor Whitcomb. The line of power that cut through generations, that had funded family businesses, that had shaped Denver society. I pressed call. The ring sounded once, twice. My chest tightened, waiting for the voice that could turn this night on its head. The call had ended with only 4 words. I'm coming. Celine. No scolding, no hesitation. Just that promise. I stood in the hallway, pulse unsteady, until the distant hum of voices inside the ballroom swelled again. 30 minutes later, the doors opened, and the shift in the air was immediate. Eleanor Whitcomb did not walk, she commanded. Her silver cane struck the marble floor with each step, the sound echoing louder than the quartet had played all night. Conversations died mid-sentence. The crowd parted as though she carried the weight of judgment itself. At 80, my grandmother still wore authority like a second skin, her gaze sharper than glass. She didn't look at me first, her eyes locked on my father. Daniel, she said, her voice low but cutting through the silence. Explain why you dared to lay a hand on my granddaughter. My father faltered, the microphone still clutched in his hand. His face drained of color, the polished veneer of host slipping away. My mother clutched his arm, her lips pressed tight, searching for a defense that would not come. Eleanor lifted her cane and pointed toward the floor. "You have 5 minutes," she said, her tone flat as stone. "Find the earring she lost when you struck her. If it is not in my hand, I will handle this myself." The guests shifted uneasily, exchanging glances, as though uncertain if this was theater or a reckoning. Gareth bent down quickly, his designer jacket brushing the floor as he scrambled near the tables. His fiancée knelt beside him, her face pale. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had whispered about me minutes before now dropped to their knees, searching under chairs, pushing aside napkins and wine glasses. I stayed near the doorway, the cool pearl hidden safely in my palm. The room that had once cheered my brother now buzzed with frantic energy. The weight of Eleanor's authority pressing down on every back bowed to the floor. My grandmother's eyes swept across the scene, unmoved, unblinking, waiting for the truth she already knew. The minutes ticked by, the search dragging on with no result. I kept my hand closed around the earring, its weight reminding me that Eleanor's demand was never about jewelry. It was about exposing them all. At last, she struck her cane against the marble, the sound like a gavel. Everyone froze, heads turning toward her. "Enough," she said. Her eyes narrowed on my father first. "Daniel, you run a company, yet you cannot govern your own temper. You raised your hand against my granddaughter as though her dignity were yours to spend." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Her gaze shifted to my mother. "Susan, you have coddled Gareth into uselessness and stood silent while cruelty became tradition. Your silence speaks louder than his slap." My mother's face tightened, but she said nothing. Then Eleanor's cane swung toward Gareth, still crouched near the floor. "And you, 35 years old, no work, no honor, and yet you believe you are owed her home? You have taken enough from your sister." The silence pressed hard against the glass walls, broken only by the sound of phones recording, cameras flashing. Eleanor straightened, shoulders squared. "Let it be known tonight, before these witnesses, that I will rewrite my will. Everything I own, my estate, my investments, my properties will pass to Celine. Not to you, Daniel. Not to you, Susan. And not to you, Gareth. She alone has proven she can build and protect what is hers." The room erupted, gasps, shouts, relatives talking over one another. Aunts argued with uncles. Cousins protested, voices climbing into chaos. Guests raised their phones higher, capturing every second, their screens glowing red. I stood still, my grandmother's declaration surrounding me like a shield. For the first time that night, I didn't feel outnumbered. I felt seen. Eleanor met my eyes across the ballroom, her small nod carrying more weight than all their noise. And as the crowd fractured into anger and disbelief, I understood that the consequences of her words would not end here. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop, notifications stacked faster than I could clear them, each one a reminder that last night's humiliation had escaped the ballroom. Someone's live stream had gone viral first on Instagram, then Twitter, then local Denver news. Clips of Gareth's slap, the gasp from the guests, and Eleanor's steel-edged words spread like wildfire. Headlines poured in millionaire airstrike's sister over penthouse dispute. Comment sections filled with outrage. Strangers dissected every second of the footage, replaying the crack of his hand, slowing down the moment my earring flew. Disgusting. She deserves better. Imagine hitting your own sister because she wouldn't hand over her home. By noon, Denver's Channel 7 aired a segment. They replayed Eleanor's declaration on loop. "I will rewrite my will. Everything I own will pass to Celine." The anchor's tone was half shock, half admiration. The fallout was immediate. Gareth's fiancée posted a cryptic message on Facebook about reconsidering commitments built on lies. Within days, the engagement was officially over. My father's business partners began pulling out of contracts, citing reputational concerns. My mother's social circle, once the envy of Cherry Creek luncheons, shrank overnight. Invitations stopped. Friends avoided her at the grocery store. I sat on my couch, phone in hand. The Denver skyline spread wide through the glass behind me. Vindication should have felt sweet, but instead it was heavy, almost suffocating. The world finally saw what I had endured. But it wasn't triumph that filled me. It was exhaustion. Years of swallowing their dismissals, their favoritism. Their silence had crystallized into one public reckoning. The comments kept pouring in, some supportive, others curious, a few invasive. I turned the screen face down on the coffee table and closed my eyes. Justice had arrived, but it carried its own weight, and I knew it wasn't the end, not while my parents still believed they could reach me. 2 nights later, the doorbell rang just past dusk. I almost didn't answer, but the shadowed figures behind the frosted glass left no doubt. My parents stood on my doorstep, their postures deflated, nothing like the poised hosts of Gareth's party. When I opened the door, my father spoke first, his voice low. "Celine, we need to talk." My mother stepped forward quickly, eyes red-rimmed, her tone pleading. "We made a mistake. The pressure to keep Gareth afloat, it got out of hand. We lost ourselves." I stayed in the doorway, arms crossed, heart tight. "You didn't lose yourselves," I said. "You chose. You demanded my home," then stood by when he struck me in front of 30 people. My father flinched as if the words themselves were blows. He tried again, softer this time. "You know how much appearances matter in this city. We thought you thought I was expendable." I cut in, that my work, my sacrifices, my independence could be repackaged as a gift for Gareth. And when I refused, you let him raise his hand against me without lifting your own to stop it. My mother's hand reached out, trembling. "We're still a family." "Celine, can't we start again?" I stepped back, shaking my head. Family doesn't ask for obedience at the cost of dignity. Family doesn't trade loyalty for silence. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the city beyond my balcony windows. Their faces drawn, desperate, blurred into the years of being unseen, unheard, unloved unless I complied. I placed my hand on the door. This is where I end it. Their silhouettes lingered as the door closed, the final click echoing through my chest. I leaned against the wood, heart pounding, but the weight that had anchored me for years began to lift, making room for something new. Weeks passed, and the noise of scandal slowly shifted from a roar to a background hum. Headlines faded, comment threads quieted, but the silence from my parents and Gareth remained. No calls, no letters, no last attempts to force a reconciliation. Their absence was louder than their words had ever been. In the same stretch of time, my world began to rebuild. At the Denver Tech Summit, I stood on stage as the new chief technology officer of our firm, a glass award in my hands catching the light. Applause rose from colleagues and strangers alike, their faces open with pride rather than expectation. For the first time, recognition came without conditions. Afterward, I joined Maris and Eleanor at a small celebration downtown. Maris raised her glass, her grin wide. To Celine, who showed us that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose who to open for. Eleanor sat beside me, her cane leaning against the table, her eyes fierce and steady. "I told you," she said softly, "you carry more strength than the rest of them combined. Don't ever forget it." The warmth in that moment was something I hadn't felt in years. Laughter filled the table, not forced, not polished, but honest. Around me, people stayed not because of obligation, but because they wanted to. Back home later that night, the penthouse felt different. The same glass walls, the same skyline spread over the city, but no longer a fortress I had to defend. It had become a place where I could welcome those who chose me, not demand from me. And as I turned off the lights, the silence waiting beyond my family's absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like freedom, guiding me toward what still lay ahead. 3 months later, the city stretched out before me in a wash of lights. From my balcony, the cranes near Union Station glimmered against the Denver skyline, each one a reminder of how quickly the world could change. The penthouse beneath my feet had once felt fragile, a prize others tried to claim. Now it was steady, mine in every sense. The legal papers had arrived a week earlier, Eleanor's signature bold across every page. Her estate properties, investments, holdings had been secured in my name. When I thanked her, she only waved a hand and said, "I'm giving it to the only one who won't waste it." Inside, the rooms were quiet, but not empty. Maris visited often, filling the kitchen with chatter and the living room with laughter. My colleagues came by after late nights at the office, bringing takeout cartons and stories. Eleanor's cane still tapped through my hallways when she came for tea, her presence grounding me more than any contract ever could. The silence from my parents and Gareth had become permanent, but I no longer measured myself against it. I had stopped looking for a door back into their approval. This place, this life, was no longer about surviving them. It was about choosing the people who respected me enough to stand beside me, leaning against the balcony rail. I felt the night air cool against my skin. The battles were behind me, but the lesson remained true. Family are not those who demand your keys, but those who guard your dignity. When dignity locks one door and opens another, which future will you step into first?